Okay, we will go ahead and begin. Hope everyone is doing well this morning. We are glad you're here for office hours, where we have an opportunity to talk about questions that individuals may have as a result of the Black Minds Matter course, and then to provide you with at least our perspectives on what are some important things people should be thinking about as they try to take the content from the actual class and then translate it into practice. So there's three questions, and myself and Dr. Ford will go ahead and begin. The first question says, when you say teachers of color are needed, does that mean any teacher of color or quality teachers of color? Dr. Ford, do you want to take that one?
Okay. Well, I definitely appreciate that question. And the answer is very simple. Whether you're a teacher of color or not, we only want rigorous, high quality teachers. We want teachers who are trained and teaching in their content areas. We want teachers who have several years of experience actually teaching, not new teachers, which is a problem. We want teachers who have demonstrated that they can be effective with our students of color. So that's overall, but we are not backing down on the recommendation that we need more teachers of color. Right now, from the last statistics I had heard, is only 7% of teachers are Black. Of that 7%, 1% are Black. And it's the exact same for Hispanic teachers. So we only have about 14% Black and Hispanic teachers. And that is problematic, especially when you consider how diverse our schools are, our nation is. But I said this before, we need teachers of color for white students also. We don't just need teachers of color for students of color. There's a hell of a lot that white students can learn from teachers of color. And that includes in higher education. So having me as a professor, having Dr. Wood as a professor, and it makes a difference. Quality.
Absolutely. I was just part of a group a couple of weeks ago where everyone went around the room to talk about when was the first time that they had a professor of the same race, and it was a group of primarily people of color, a lot of Black people, and it was interesting the range, but it's very common to see that many of us don't have a faculty of color or professor of color until we get to college. For me, my first experience ever seeing a Black person in the classroom in any capacity was when I went to college, and so I think that that's not uncommon for many people. The other thing I want to say is just the phrasing of this question. Just a note to be thoughtful about. When there's a question that says, when you say teachers of color needed, does that mean any teacher or quality teachers of color? I want to kind of push back on the linkage between the push to have teachers of color and then the question about quality. I think that what the Black Minds Matter has shown is that there are many teachers who are white who don't have high quality. So I want us to not draw a false characterization. One of the microaggressions that we talked about in this class is an ascription of intelligence, which was when we assume that some people based upon their race are academically inferior, less intelligent, less capable. And so I think we want to make sure that when we ask these questions, that they're also done in a way that conveys the perspective that Black minds, whether it's a student, a teacher, et cetera, are brilliant and capable.
Luke, let me say something. I'm glad you brought that up because it was something in the back of my mind. I'm like, what do I want to say? Well, you just said it. All right, let's not pathologize, and that question may not be raised or tends not to be raised when it's a white teacher, and a lot of them are not high quality. A lot of them, I didn't say how many, I don't know the percent, are incompetent and then culturally incompetent. But when you bring up ascription of intelligence, the second part of that will be pathologizing our culture, which you mentioned. And that's embedded in that question. Even though it may be meaningless, what do you call it, harmless, no ill intent, there was something in the back that oozes, something in the back of my mind that said, this oozes of deficit thinking. So you nailed it. Teamwork.
Right. Okay, I'm just responding in the chat window, just making sure folks know where to post. Okay, next question says, thanks so much for this whole course series, which has been enormously helpful. Here's the question I have for the group. I'm a professor of teacher in a teacher education program in upstate New York and teach the Social Foundations course. I'm feeling an enormous challenge and opportunity to reconstruct the course for the future to help raise up future teachers who will be part of a solution rather than part of a problem. I've been trying to decide on what would be best readings for some teachers. I want to challenge them to think about how they can be change agents. I'm having a hard time out of every reading I deciding on which ones is best. These are college first and second year students. So I definitely have recommendations. I think Dr. Ford has recommendations on this as well. So in the first Black Minds Matter series that we did, there was a listing of articles that had been focused on Black boys and men in education. In fact, we call it the top 20 must reads that everyone should have. I definitely recommend going back and looking at those. Almost every single guest you've seen has articles that are in there. The other place I would say is that we have the public course syllabus this time around. And Dr. Ford and I carefully put in readings that we thought would be helpful in framing the conversation. So if you don't have access to the public course syllabus, we can post a link to that here. So that would be another place. And then I would just say, really anything that has been written by the guest speakers, we're very careful in who we bring in to speak about these issues, making sure that these are people who are really, truly knowledgeable. So I would say that anything that has the last name Ford or Howard or Lewis or Zamani Gallagher, etc., should be part of your reading list.
I echo those comments, and feel free to push your students. It is far over time that we stop, and I don't mean we, but people stop walking on eggshells when it comes to making sure that their students are anti-racist and that we are addressing this real serious issue of anti-Blackness. So not showing preferential treatment, but I think your readings, as was just said, always needs to be with an eye toward Blacks and Black males who are the most demonized socially and the most demonized in education, which is why the theme of this year has been about the school to prison pipeline. And it has been demonstrated by speakers that it starts early and it's ongoing and goes all the way. I mean, it's just ongoing. But yeah, so, and if your students, so I don't know how you identify racially. But for example, as a Black person, early on, I'll have my students ask questions like, well, why are the most of the readings and videos and discussions about Blacks? And I made it clear, it's just not because I'm Black. It's because of the hell and the chaos and the hatred that's going on with Blacks. And so we have to lean more toward helping our Black students and our Black males in particular without apology and be assertive and proactive about it.
Next question, and it says, at my college, we are fighting for a Black faculty member and a class that helps Black students. We are going to press tomorrow and looking for tips. So they're advocating, Dr. Ford, to hire more Black faculty members and to have a class that is designed to help Black students.
Well, I really have to say that my dean, Pope Davis here, has been phenomenal at hiring a great number of Black faculty since he's been at Ohio State almost, 2 years, a little over 2 years perhaps. So I'm not trying to give him more work to do, but I would say study what he has done. And then hire in, what are they called? Look, in clusters? Is it?
Clusters.
Okay, do cluster hiring so there can be a cohort. So it's not a sense of isolation. Make sure that there's just so many recommendations, but um, make sure that when you are doing these faculty hires, that you're just really upfront with our colleagues about the university and the quality of life and what the needs are, including the Black tax. So I don't know if I answered that question, but that's
No,
what comes to mind.
no, I think you did. And I can go on the second part of it first. In terms of the class itself, I would organize the class, taking elements of the course from Black Minds Matter. I think that there's things that have been said here that would be very important for Black students to hear as well. For example, when we talk about microaggressions, I find that while training majority communities on microaggressions is important, equally as important is training Black communities, because what I have found is that we have these experiences happening to us, but we don't know where to place them. So the response is to think, is it me? Did I say something wrong? Am I overreacting? And that attribution ambiguity creates some real challenges. And it's one of the reasons why microaggressions has been referred to by Gloria Ladson Billings and a number of other scholars as the 1,000 daily cuts, because are seemingly innocuous, they're seemingly small, but those little cuts add up over time. And there are a lot of scholars who say they can be more psychologically damaging than direct forms of racism. So I would think that you'd want to have that as part of the class, as well as educating students on those issues and how they can have agency in advocating, when they occur to them, knowing who to go to, where the support is. In terms of faculty and Black faculty recruitment, it happens to be what I do for my day job. So I would say that having search criteria where you have where faculty members with a demonstrated record of success in either research, teaching, or service, and if it's and since it's a community college, I would focus on teaching and or service focus on Black populations. That will help you to get around 209 given the state that you're in. Because it will focus on the knowledge and skills rather than the actual background of the individual. I always believe that all search committees should have extensive ongoing training on implicit bias that doesn't just deal with the search process, but also the on-campus process, where a lot of the more subtle forms of microaggressions are going to play out. I believe in having inclusion representatives that serve on every committee, so that you have somebody there holding people accountable, advocating for diversity and inclusion. I would think that you would also want to have a system of public reporting and accountability around any effort. Like Dr. Ford said, the number one strategy above and beyond everything is going to be able to do cluster hires. Cluster hires helps you to solve two problems at once. One, it brings in a group of people who help to fill the skill sets that you need in serving Black students. But second, it creates a cohort of people who are going through the same experience at the same time, so that they don't feel like they are in isolation. Even better when the cluster hires can be aggregated within specific departments or colleges rather than spread throughout a campus that may not be as supportive of them.
And you did not use this word, and sometimes it's overused, Professor Wood, but I want to use it right now because it was embedded in what you said a few minutes ago. And that is, the more you know about yourself, the stronger you can be. And so the word I'm thinking about is like empowerment. So yes, we have to teach, say, Black students and other minoritized individuals about microaggressions. And so that we know that, for the most part, it is not us. It is not us. But one of the theories that I think really needs to be addressed also is racial identity. We need to teach our students, our children, our students, P to 12, as well as higher education, racial pride. When you love being Black and someone comes after you that has a problem with you being Black, then you can handle it a little bit better. I'm not saying it's easy, but I believe you can handle it a little bit better. So when somebody says to me, "Oh, you work at a PWI, predominantly white, university, and therefore you're a sellout," I'm like, "Get the blank out of here. That's your problem. That's not my problem." So I can just wash that off, ignore it. Racial pride is just so important. And so look up racial identity theories. I don't want to, unless you think it's okay, Luke, give my favorite one, at least for Blacks.
Oh yeah.
But my favorite one is William Cross's model,
Yep.
the Gresson's theory, which is also called the psychology of becoming Black. And I think many Blacks have gone through those stages, and I know I have twice. I know I have twice. And one was as a teenager, and one was at the age of like 30 something. But once I finally reached the last stage of identity, then or phase or stage. If it's a student, you call it. If it's a child, you call it phase. If it's an adult, you call it stage. But called multiculturalism. Once I reached that, I just took off, and it has been so rewarding. So insight, self-reflection, it really is very empowering.
Absolutely. Next question says, "Good morning. I'm on my school's student engagement team. I'm the librarian, so the kids sort of know me. The difference is what I'm calling it's because I genuinely care. How do I convince my BIPOC students that I'm not just another white lady calling, that I really do care?" And I would say that how you convey that is through authenticity. Students are, particularly students from minoritized communities, are very good at being able to spot those who they think are inauthentic in their care, their support, their validation, etc. So what you have to do is, like, for example, if you're going to validate them, it has to be done as true validation and not with a sense of surprise where it becomes microaggressive. But I believe they have to have that trust in you. So they have to know that they can go to you, that you're going to support them, that you have their back, mutual respect, that you're down to earth, willing to have conversations, and authentic care that shared a vested interest where if they do well, you are going to personally feel like you did well. If they don't do well, that you're going to personally feel like you didn't do well. You should also expect for there to be barriers that you run into. One of the things that we have found, Frank and I, in our work, is that if you validate a student who hasn't received a lot of validation, the
Mhm.
natural response for them is to push back, because there may be concerns about, like, where are you coming from in terms of authenticity? Are you really here to support me? Are you trying to get over on me? Is this something that is real? Especially when you think about, for a lot of our students, they unfortunately don't receive that, so it becomes almost a foreign message to them when they do. So what we believe is it's the pervasiveness and persistence of that message. So it's continuing to validate them and say these positive things, to check in on them on a regular basis. And when you do so and you continue to come through, that's what will be the way of building that trust. And once you have done so with some, others will talk about, oh, that's a, they will say that's a cool white lady, or you can trust her, right? She's got your back. So the students will share that message once there's that relationship that can essentially serve as validation for that. But think about validating messages and building trust with the students.
Yeah, relationships, which of course comes with building trust, and obviously with respect. Relationships really do matter, and so make sure you know your students' names. Make sure you pronounce the names correctly. Compliment students on small things that they probably thought you didn't notice. So, and I'm being serious right here. So, all these other classes, Dr. Wood, I'm just like, hey, just throw this hair and, just throw it together. Today I tried to curl it. I
Mhm.
hope somebody noticed. That took me about 10 minutes, and I don't like it necessarily. But if a teacher were to say, oh, your hair is different, It's like, well, good. Damn, she knows my hair is different because I put some time into this. Oh, I like your earrings, or I like your necklace. And I'm just picking, maybe I'm not trying to be sexist. But I heard you did a great job, playing basketball, or, um, choose something in visual performing arts, right? Let them know that you're even paying attention to what they're doing outside of school, so that you're not what we call a drive-by teacher, a drive-by educator, where you just come in, do your thing, and then leave. Try to go to some of the events that students have taken. Well, after, when we can do that, right? But it would be really important when you can go and see what students are doing after school. Then I think you are genuine. I remember one time a teacher, white male, years ago, asked me if it would be, if he should try to learn Black English or slang in order to build relationships with students. And that was a tough one for me because I didn't think he would come across as genuine. I mean, there's no class you can go take in learning Black English, no less slang. But to learn Black English as well as slang, you've got to interact with students. And if you use it, you have to be genuine and not think, oh, let me use Black English. You just do it. You just do it and more.
Next question says, Dr. Andre Perry of the Brookings Institution said it best when he stated, "There is nothing wrong with Black people that ending racism can't solve." I would like it if you can elaborate a little bit more detail about Dr. Perry's most powerful and profound statement.
Well, bottom line, he was saying there's nothing wrong with us. And there's nothing wrong with Black children. There's nothing wrong with our culture. There's nothing wrong with how we speak. There's nothing wrong with you fill in the blank. It is how people adultify our children, is how the police criminalize us, is how these, what do you call them, resource officers criminalize us. It is how we are misrepresented in children's literature, which I just read something on more recently on racism in children's literature. So this is what is dumped on and imposed on us. We're okay. If we're okay, people, educators, professionals, those in power need to learn more about us. So I forgot which session it was, but I stated the less we know about others, the more we make up. And the reverse, the more we the more we know about others, the less we make up. So we don't know enough. We're not trying, people are not trying to know enough. They are not getting the training to know better and do better. Leaders are not being held accountable. Universities are not teaching, which was what two questions earlier. And one of the major focus of Black Minds Matter, but not teaching about us. They're not undoing stereotypes about us and more. So we're fine. Stop the racism.
So I want to respond to that as well. So first of all, this whole week I've sat thinking about that statement because it is a powerful statement and it is profound. And one of the things that it reminded me of was a study that I've seen before that was actually a really particularly well done study looking at implicit bias. And so what they did in this study was very similar to what you might see in a lot of resume studies, where you'll see in the resume studies, well, they'll have two resumes, they're exactly the same, and then they just change the name. And one of them is they change the name to a stereotypically Black name, they change the other one to a stereotypically white name, the same resume, they give them to different groups of people, and they come back overwhelmingly selecting the white candidate, right? And so this study was meant to understand how that process plays out, and also what is it that the individuals actually look at when they do it. So what they did was they did a very similar study. They took resumes of white individuals, resumes of black individuals. But what they did is that they made sure that on this identical resume that there was both good information and bad information. Good information would be being in a job for a long period of time, having successive levels of promotions, maybe having more and more people put underneath you, having higher levels of job responsibility. So progressing within an organization. The negative information they put on dealt with work history breakups. So like, for example, being in one job and then quickly out of that job. So multiple jobs in short timeframes, or big gaps in employment history, or like a big and inflated title with maybe very little responsibilities, which would be a red flag. So they put these kind of common red flags. Then what they did is they gave these resumes to people, again, good information, bad information on identical resumes. All they did was change the name at the top. And then they gave the people who are looking at it these eye goggle software, very similar to the work that, to what Walter Gilliam has done. And basically what they did was they tracked the eye movements to look at what people were looking at in the resume. And what they found was this, that when the person was from a majority group or was white and they were looking at the resumes and it was of a person who was black, they spent more time looking at the bad information that was on this identical resume. When the person was white, they spent more time looking at the positive information that was on the resume, and ultimately those informed the decisions that they made. And basically what the study concluded was that there was confirmation bias, that ultimately an individual made a subconscious decision to select someone who was most like them in group bias, and then they looked for information to provide confirmation that that was indeed a good decision. So they said that this is both extraordinary and very concerning. And when I hear your question, I think that that's ultimately what Dr. Perry is getting at. There's nothing wrong with Black people that ending racism can't solve, right? There is, but unfortunately, some people are unable to visualize a more equitable and just world because of their own personal failings and how they view people who are different from themselves. Again, we've talked about viewing Black people through distrust, disdain, disregard, and really needing to move towards a new space where we're instead extolling their brilliance, their dignity, and their morality, right? It's the whole other opposite end. But I do think that what he said was very powerful. And I think it takes away, Dr. Ford earlier used the word pathologize. It takes away these pathologizations, I'm not even saying it right, the pathologies of Black people.
That are in people's heads that do not exist. And this is why we have over referrals for disciplinary, for special, for discipline, very subjective, as we said already in the course. This is why we have over referrals for certain categories of special education, again, subjective, and particularly when it comes to behavior. And then we have under referral to gifted education or any type of advanced class. So this deficit thinking, this implicit bias, this pathologizing, this demonizing Black people, Black children from early on is a problem. Let me just say this one last thing. Upchurch, I think his name is Upchurch. I remember several years ago, reading this book by Upchurch, and it was called Convicted in the Womb. And that just says it all right there. I saw your face, Luke.
That's a good title.
Convicted in the Womb. And, it's like an autobiography. And if you've not read it, then I hope you will. But just think about that title. And this is very difficult to say, but I remember so I have a grandson who will be 9 next month. And I remember when I heard it was going to be a boy, and so I have a son, but then a grandson. And when I heard I was going to have a grandson, I'm like, oh shit, I gotta go through this again with police profiling, with over referrals to special education, with trying to prove that my son is gifted, with, I mean, it should have been a time of joy. It was concerns about being convicted in the womb. And that's real talk, real talk.
Absolutely. Next question says, my children attend school in a predominantly white other district that has no Black educators. How do I stress the urgency of having Black educators represented? Well, I mean, if the institution has no Black educators, they've already demonstrated their commitment. Now it could be where you're living. Of course, there's some locales that, if it's a significantly over, homogenous community, but even then, there needs to be a commitment to bringing Black educators in. That's a benefit for Black students, but as Dr. Ford says, it benefits everyone. How do you stress the urgency? I think there's a ton of research that's been done that you can show to do this. But ultimately, what I would rather you do is to take a step back and think to yourself about this. Is the environment that your child is in a healthy environment? Are they being validated? Are they being cared for? Are they being criminalized? Are any of the patterns that we're talking about manifesting? And if so, if there are challenges in the environment, I'd want for you to think to yourself, a quote that I've offered a few times before from a colleague, Andre Branch, said, never leave your child in a good school, never leave your child in an unhealthy environment for the sake of a good school. And so what you don't want to do is to leave your child in an environment where they're not going to be supported and cared about. So if you see that there are those challenges, I would encourage you to intercede. And let me give you a personal reason why. So obviously I'm African American. I have a twin brother, we're African American. We were born as into the foster care system, raised in a foster home, and eventually adopted in that same home, and then grew up in a all white community. There was only like a handful of Black people in the community who are a much older generation. And it was me and my brother by ourselves in schools, always by ourselves. And having been a person who's navigated that experience, I can say that there's a lot of damage that happens along the way. So I think that you should definitely be thinking to yourself, how are you trying to counterbalance that with exposure to positive examples of Black people around them? And to further that example, one of the things that got me into this work was this experience growing up in an environment where there were no educators who looked like me. I was fortunate, I had a really good teacher in kindergarten, and then here and there, good teachers and bad teachers. But it really wasn't until I hit fifth grade that I had a very difficult experience. I had a teacher who was a white female who was, for lack of a better terms, racist, and she was. I mean, I think she had probably a white hood in her closet. And I know that when I was in fifth grade, that I was suspended 42 times, and my twin brother was suspended 24 times in one school year because of someone who didn't view us as anything else but a problem. So what I would just say is, when I hear that question, a whole bunch of other red flags go up for me. It makes me wonder, is it a rural area? Because rural areas tend to have much higher suspension rates. It may be that they're not being supported in other ways. I would just say that there's a lot of things that you want to keep in mind with this question that go above and beyond whether or not now that they have a Black educator or some Black educators in the district.
Look, Dr. Wood, it's obviously painful to hear, about that experience in the fifth grade. And you had told me about that before. And at Ohio State, in something called Inspire series, a podcast, maybe it was, I don't know, a week and a half ago, I shared my story as a 10th grader. And, alert, that includes being one of very few Blacks at a private school for this great education, in quotation marks, and becomes suicidal because of one teacher. And as you said, who Luke must have had a white robe in her closet, and several of them, because she tortured me. And yet it was a rigorous, private school that wreaked so much damage. It wasn't worth it. So I left after a year. Thank goodness.
Absolutely. And it's important to make sure that again, we're not leaving people in unhealthy environments. We've amended the Q&A function so that you can upvote questions, just because I know there's 9 questions left and we won't get through the rest of them in this time. So feel free to go in there and upvote any questions, but we'll just go from where we have left off. How do you propose to your predominantly PWI community college how to start the race conversation if they've already identified a white staffer to head this initiative? Although the administration say they have intentions on race relations using IDEO design, how would you suggest that the few Black staffers have a stake in this rather than having a white person capitalizing the conversation? Any suggestions to ideas to the college?
Well, my suggestion is the person has already, the person has already been designated. Don't know what the criteria and qualifications are, but you have to speak up. Your voice matters. And I don't mean speak up in terms of instigation necessarily, as much as speak up to make sure that what is taught, what is being talked about, what is being shared is impactful and will make a difference. So keep providing suggestions and ideas, and your voice matters.
And what I would also say is, sometimes institutions, when they're making these decisions on who's going to lead a diversity initiative, do go back and forth on whether that person should be white or not. And one of the thinking, some of the sense making around that is, well, if they're white, then we're not taxing people of color and asking them to lead these efforts. But then the other side of it can be that was never thought of or conversation, and they just picked somebody who they wanted to do that they would be comfortable with, right? So I don't know the context, and the context means everything in those kinds of selections and decisions. But ultimately, how the judge about whether or not they will be the right person for the role is, does one of their first actions in this role, is it to pull all the Black faculty together and staffers together and to have a conversation with them about what they're experiencing and use that to develop a framework for all the work that they're going to be doing. If doesn't end up being one of the first things that they say that they want to do without you prodding them that this needs to be done, if it's not one of the first things that they put out there, sitting down with minoritized students and having those conversations as well, then it's not the right person for the initiative and you shouldn't have any faith in it. But if they do prioritize your voice, elevate your voice, and then work collectively to help get the work done, then I think that might be someone you can believe in. But ultimately, I think you should have to look at the fruit of their labor. And if it doesn't bear fruit, all it is window dressing.
And when you're in these meetings, and this is just period, be careful. There are too many people who will rob you of your ideas. And I'm always saying, keep a paper trail. So it's important to share ideas because we want change, but we also want to get credit for that and not just give it away. So paper trail, follow up with an email indicating some suggestions that you made so that you can also get credit. I just have to put that out there.
Oh, I was on mute. Okay. Here's the next question. Do you have any recommendations for Black homeschooling curriculum and or online school?
There is, and on Facebook, there's a Black homeschool organization. So I would recommend that you do some searches on Facebook. I can't recall what it is right now. I have a Facebook group called Grace G apostrophe race, RACE. It's intentional. And that is all about gifted students of color. And homeschooling is mentioned in there, as well as identification, testing, assessment, curriculum, etc. But there is, and there may be more, but there is a Black Homeschool Association, and it's pretty large and popular.
Yes. I would also say this, I know that a lot more Black families are looking at homeschool options. Um, and part of it is, some have had children at home now during COVID and have seen their children grow and flourish, and then said to themselves, are they getting at home what they wouldn't have gotten in school? And so we're definitely seeing it as a pattern, and understand why many parents are looking to that. As educators, we still believe in schools, but we also believe that you should do whatever is best for your child. For some children, that is going to be an online school. So for some children, that is going to be homeschooling. For other children, it's going to be a charter school, a traditional public, a private. Here's one thing. This is the lie that people will tell. They'll say that one school type matters. They'll say that, for example, oh, charter schools are better than traditional public schools, or they'll say the private schools are better than this. But the truth is, there's good charter schools, there's bad charter schools, there's good public schools, there's bad public schools. Ultimately, what the choice needs to be is whether or not it's going to be a high quality school for your child.
I mean, yeah, one that as best you can matches your child's personality. So I mean, all those different types of schools, I had to consider, would this match with the way my son likes to learn? He's very tactile and kinesthetic. He's a visual learner. He also likes to, have conversations, and I don't want him getting in trouble like I used to for being called talkative. But does the school, allow that? And so, yeah, just search many options, do your homework, and go visit the school and talk to not just the educators, but talk to the families. There's a website that I want to mention. I mentioned it when I did a short presentation a few weeks ago, but it's OCR, Office for Civil Rights. So it's ocrdata.ed.gov. I repeat, ocrdata.ed.gov. And when you go there, you will be able to go straight to the current school that your child attends, or one that you're thinking about. 100%, 99 point something, which is basically 100% of schools must report to the Office for Civil Rights. So you will get an overview of suspension, expulsion, gifted education, number of times police have been called, advanced placement, and more. So do your homework, and OCR is the place to go for the information. And when I just look at what I see on paper, that tells me already, excuse me, yes or no, or maybe.
All right, next question. How do we get our books into the schools at all levels? Children like to read books about people who look like them. I've published several books on music for third graders and up, and I have not been able to break the ceiling in the schools.
Yeah, that I saw that question a minute ago, and I unfortunately don't have the answer to that. So I think, but I do think that to get more, what is it called, attention, you use your social media platforms, whichever ones, plural, that you uh, um, prefer.
So I just want to validate the importance of it. So there's a concept in reading education called window books and mirror books. A window book is when the stories, the characters, the storylines, and the ideas that are being expressed are ones that don't necessarily reflect that of the child. So it's a Black child reading a story about white characters, white storylines, and ultimately what that means is that they're looking out into a window into someone else's life and experience. And then there's what we call Mirror books. A mirror book is when you are looking into a mirror. The stories, the storylines, the characters are reflective of your own self and your own community. And I do know that it's absolutely critical that children read books that are reflective of them. Otherwise, it will, I think, have a negative effect on framing their own identities as academic beings. The other thing that I would say is something that I learned from Dr. Ford on the very first Black Minds Matter, because she, during the first session of Black Minds Matter ever, she did a talk that looked at children's books and showed us that the vast majority of children's books are not written by Black authors, and even more so, that the vast majority of Black children's books aren't written by Black authors indeed. So there is a need for there to be both diverse books that are diverse, but also books that are written by people who are reflective of the communities that they're actually writing about, who have an emic perspective. Otherwise, it goes back to the quote that Dr. Ford said earlier today: the less we know about others, the more we make up. And that's what those books end up doing. So I would say maybe think about establishing a reading group online of Black children, where you go on and you read maybe your books, and you can do it on Facebook and then use it to advertise it. And then maybe what you use is an opportunity for those people who like it to reach out to their school officials. I would send maybe complimentary copies to some of the different school officials.
Great
I
idea.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people right now are looking for after school activities. I mean, because ultimately, one of the things that COVID has done is it has taken away that time. So I think that you could actually probably do a lot of good with maybe even a district level program, a reading program focused on your books, as using the after school model first to kind of gain your way into working with the schools.
And so that you don't have to search for it, the notion of windows and mirrors books came from, she's a professor emeritus here at Ohio State University, but Rudine Sims Bishop. So she wrote that early in the 70s about the importance. But as was just said by my colleague, over 90, was it 92% of children's books are still about white children, and if written for and about, and if they're not about white children, they're about animals, and then they rarely ever get to our Black children. So I'm not going to reiterate what you said, but right on point. My dean put out a grant opportunity, and so I'm working with a librarian and one of my colleagues, both of who, and my colleague who does multicultural literature as well as social studies. But anyway, we have a multicultural lending library, with the concept of mirrors and windows, but we given mirrors, not window books. And there are organizations out there that also talk about award-winning books, but work with the librarian too.
So we're going to take the last question for today. And then while Dr. Ford is answering this question, I'll do my best to try to respond in text writing to the remaining questions in the Q&A. But it says, do you have any ideas on how we can shift away from terms like behavior management and best practice in teacher education, as these encourage teacher-centered instead of student-centered pedagogy? How can we get away from the clinical focus and over-standardization of PK-12? I do address this in my courses, but I'm just one person. For context, if it matters, I'm a white woman teacher educator at both the community college and the CSU.
Well, I don't like the term behavior management. I like, more, and it's still not good enough, classroom management. And still, I don't even know if I like the word management. So yeah, where'd that question go?
Oh,
It just slipped away. But
yeah.
anyway, the onus is on us too, as educators, to speak up and talk about different terms that we do prefer. And with our colleagues, why don't we question them and challenge them? It doesn't have to be an aggressive challenge, but an assertive challenge, a proactive challenge, or conversation to talk about terminology. So I cannot remember who said this, and this is what got me to start disdaining the word behavior management. So not just management, like we're controlling animals. We're talking about people and children, but behavior management. I forgot the person who said this, but he said behavior, if I remember correctly, he said behavior means nothing until those with power give it meaning. It means nothing until the teacher says, or thinks that it means something. And so we as educators need to reduce and give up some of that power. And behavior is just subjective. So I'm not just talking about management. Behavior is subjective. So I remember one time being invited to a university class. I hate this being done, but I went ahead and did it. But it was like, okay, we're going to talk about Blacks today. So let's bring in Dr. Ford. And then next week, we're going to talk about Hispanics. Let's bring in XYZ. But anyway, so I did the Black professor for the day. I only did it twice before I just said, this is just outrageous. And, I had to have a conversation. But anyway, I walked in the room and I always try to have visuals. And this young lady had her back to my presentation and I was fuming. I was pissed. And she had her hands crossed. And I'm thinking, how the hell is she going to see my presentation? How disrespectful it is that she has her arms crossed and her back to my presentation. That was my interpretation. Come to find out, the young lady had hearing issues, so she needed to sit up close. And then when she finally did turn around, it was something about it was kind of cold outside and she had her arms crossed because she was cold. And when that class ended, she was the most informed student. So my first impressions were very subjective based on my interpretation of what behavior should like, and then my emotional reaction to her, and it was all incorrect. All incorrect. Behavior means nothing until those with power give it meaning, and that's problematic. Don't know if that answered the question, but I hope it gives you something to think about.
All right, everyone, we appreciate you being here and for participating in this live office hours. We'll make sure that the recording of this is posted as soon as we can, sometime today. And in closing, just remember that Black minds matter.
Put that fist up. Thank you all. We appreciate you.